If you know how the food industry works, you might be aware that they regularly use vaccines on, let's say, cows or different farm animals with the purpose of making them allegedly not catch different kind of like farm animal diseases. Well, they're going to start using the mRNA vaccines for that as well. And there's some different experiments with this going on. They're even talking about using it on basic food. Even if you don't eat meat, some of the foods you might consume could now soon have mRNA vaccines in them. And people are naturally concerned about this. And on that note, too, the CDC is now investigating, along with the FDA, some of the claims around stroke being caused by the vaccines. But there's going to be a lot to go into today, so stick around for that.
Special technology, meaning that any bit of meat or food that you get will be DNA altered using a particle, sort of whatever they do, right? How does that relate to everything that we do here, right? I know that you might be here watching for finance. A lot of people might be sitting here thinking, Nathan, I remember when you used to do renovations. That's what made me follow you. People might be sitting here going, Nathan, you used to be cool when you were on TV and all those sorts of things that I used to do. I'm just calling out bullshit when I see it. I'm calling out very bad things that are happening from your government, from your media, from your corporations. We're being brainwashed. And
I have concerns if this is actually getting into what we call shedding samples, of which breast milk would be one of the fluids, you know, where these vaccines could be passed on from an individual to another individual. I'm starting to get worried about, because it's interesting. This technology technically is not new. It's new, relatively new for being used in people. It's been used for quite a few years in agricultural species. And I'm actually starting to get quite worried. If these vaccines can get into things like milk products, I start worrying about our food products. People have to realize these technologies are not only being pushed hard now in people, but they are being fast-tracked. Many of them are being fast-tracked. And we're going to have our food species loaded up with these messenger RNA vaccines. And we need to understand whether or not these things are getting into our food products now, things like eggs and cow's milk, etc. The biggest concern would be that we might be consuming messenger RNA vaccine products, you know, through our food unknowingly. And again, even if it's small amounts. Now this is actually a concern. So people might say, okay, we don't know because we haven't been looking for this. So we need to do the research. I keep saying as a scientist, all these things we're talking about are very valid concerns, and we need to do the research so that we can really get definitive answers and know whether they're legitimate concerns or not. But here's an example of a concern. Let's say, for example, we start using a lot of messenger RNA vaccines on poultry. One area where people are looking at developing messenger RNA vaccines for use in poultry, so we're talking about things like chickens and turkeys, are messenger RNA vaccines to target the influenza virus. That's because, guess what? A lot of the most severe influenza outbreaks that we experience as people actually come from animals, right? Zoonotic disease, so specifically the swine flu and avian flu. And so this is the interesting thing. So the concept is, if you vaccinate these animal species, they're not going, in theory, and this is a concern too, because we haven't seen so far that messenger RNA vaccines are capable of preventing infection. But the concept would be that we vaccinate these animals, and if they can't get infected with the influenza virus, then they can't infect us with the influenza virus. So my concern, though, is if you put in a messenger RNA vaccine, let's take chickens, for example. If we vaccinate chickens with the messenger RNA vaccine against the influenza virus, and some of that ends up being packaged in the eggs, and then we consume those eggs, people don't realize there's a concept called oral tolerance. Oral tolerance, it's an immunological mechanism whereby our immune system learns to not respond to things that we consume. The purpose is we don't want to be mounting immune responses against our food. So this prevents things like food allergies. It prevents things like chronic intestinal inflammation, things like Crohn's disease. So we call it oral tolerance. So things that you consume, generally speaking, our immune system will learn not to respond to it. So now think about this. So if we are unknowingly consuming vaccines directed against the influenza virus, especially if those vaccines cause in our gastrointestinal tract the antigens to be expressed. So, for example, against influenza virus, there's the theoretical risk we could be tolerizing ourselves against the influenza virus. And one of the ways in order to make oral tolerance work actually is to administer these antigens. In particular, what often works well are low doses. Low doses. Can you imagine? So this is a legitimate scientific concern. If we start loading up animal species with this, and we start risking tolerizing ourselves, can you imagine if we start tolerizing people unwittingly against influenza virus? What that means is that our immune systems, if we were to be infected with the influenza virus, our immune system would not recognize it as a dangerous foreign pathogen, but actually recognize it as something that should not be responded to. That would actually make people highly susceptible to severe influenza.